We are now recording.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the monthly breakfast co-sponsored by the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York and the City University of New York Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College. I am Maria Volpe. I'm a professor at John Jay College and the director of the Dispute Resolution Center there. I started these breakfasts after 9/11. We met in person at John Jay College until March 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. In April 2020, we started this virtual modality for the breakfast and continue. We've had a number of conversations over the last couple of years over whether we will ever go back in person. At some point, we'll have that conversation again. But this is an opportunity for us to connect with our colleagues around the world every first Thursday of the month. This morning is our 270th breakfast since 9/11. The breakfasts are recorded, and the recordings are posted at www.acrgny.org. If you go to that website, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a link to recordings. Click on that, and you'll find the recordings at least since April 2020. We'll also be posting them on the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center's website as soon as our website construction is completed. Our monthly breakfasts would not be possible each month if it wasn't for a wonderful team that we have that consists of Matthew Latimer, Nikki Borofsky, Emily Skinner, and Chloe Choi. We are so delighted each month to have our colleagues join us as speakers. And today we have Debra Hamilton. She will be introduced in just a minute by Nikki Borofsky. But before I turn it over to Nikki, I'm going to turn it over to Emily Skinner, who is the president of ACR-GNY, with a brief announcement on upcoming events. Emily?
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to let you know that our call for proposals is open for our 23rd annual conference that will be happening in June. And this year's conference theme and focus is how do we expand the field? So it really connects to the conversation we were having during the networking hour and thinking about how do we grow the field and what's next. And so encourage you to submit a proposal, connect with another colleague and submit together. The conference is always a great 3 days of connection, learning, really kind of thinking big. And so I'll put the link in the chat so you can read more about it. Or if you have any questions or anything, feel free to send me a direct message and we can talk more too. I'll pass it back to you, Maria.
Thank you, Emily. And now I'm going to turn it over to Nikki, who will introduce Debra, who's been a trailblazer in getting us to think about how we can take care of our wonderful pets when we're in conflict. So, Nikki, over to you.
Thank you so much, Maria. It is with great pleasure that I have the privilege of welcoming and introducing today's distinguished speaker, Debra Hamilton, to the Breakfast Roundtable. Debra is the principal at Hamilton Law and Mediation in Hamilton ADR in North Carolina and based in New York a little bit as well. She's a conflict coach, mediator, and collaborative legal professional. She works helping people and institutions to resolve disputes involving animals worldwide. She is the author of a very cool book called Nipped in the Bud, Not in the Butt: How to Use Mediation to Resolve Conflicts Over Animals, which I encourage everybody to check out. She also hosts a podcast and has an international pet planning community call every month. She does a lot. And I just want to give a little context. It's always great to have, heroes speaking, but when I did my very initial mediation training, Debra was the example that the New York Peace Institute gave about how to set up a successful mediation business. And that was, over a decade ago. And I think that, she's proved to everybody that having a really special niche can be just a gateway to enormous success. We were talking earlier before the call, and it just shows when people are passionate about what they do. And I think that you will all feel that when Debra speaks to us. She's passionate about animals. She owns, breeds, and shows Irish setters and long-haired dachshunds. And if you hear a squeak in the background, it might just be one of her lovely pets playing. So it's on point. It's not a distraction. I'm going to cut my introduction short so that Debra can get into the meat of what she's going to present to us today. But many of you might have become new pet owners during the pandemic. The rise of conflicts involving our fur babies is growing and growing and becoming really important. There have been important changes in the law, certainly in New York and a couple of other states as well, with how pets are treated in the eyes of the law. Debra's going to touch on that too, and I can't wait to hear what she says. She's encouraged everybody to chime in with questions either in the chat or raise your hand while she's speaking. So this is a real conversation, and we'll try and facilitate that. Maria and Emily and Chloe and I will try and interject with your questions if you don't feel comfortable interjecting. So Debra, the floor is yours. Thank you so much again for being with us, and I'm excited to hear your presentation.
Well, thank you, Nikki. Everything that was said on the half hour that I was listening in as a fly on the wall, expanding our field is important. And being able to understand what you do that brings resolution to people is really important. So when I was studying to be a mediator, I tried to do mediation of everything. And then I realized the one thing I was really good at was helping people resolve conflicts that involved animals. So I'm going to share my screen so I don't put the cart before the horse here. Play from the start. And I want to thank everyone at ACRGNY, especially, of course, the wonderful Maria who created this so many years ago. And I made it down from Westchester so often. And I said, it's just so far, Maria. And she would say, I come from 2 hours north of you. And I'm like, okay, so I will shut up now. And Nikki is so wonderful as well. So today we're going to discuss using mediation to resolve conflicts over animals. As Nikki pointed out, I wrote a book called Nipped in the Bud, Not in the Butt, How to Use Mediation to Resolve Conflicts Over Animals, because it really is something that people don't even consider when conflicts over animals arise. And I'll get into that more in my presentation. But for now, let's kick it off. So I put this slide together, not because I'm like patting myself on the back, but if you see, when you are creating a practice, or if you have a practice, being affiliated with people who need to know what you do is really important. So not only am I in the mediation world, which I love, all of my New York State Bar Association dispute resolution colleagues, all my New York City Bar Association colleagues, I've even joined the North Carolina Bar Association DR colleagues to be able to spread the word about what I do. I mean, we have to be our own advocates and be that person that somebody might reach out to. I know I've had several of my colleagues call me either for assistance if they were handling a case involving an animal, or if they didn't want to handle it because they wanted to run with their hair on fire, they would call me and I would do that one small piece. I said to Maria, when we began, I said, I don't want to do divorces. I know, but I will do the pet part of a divorce because it really is different. It's really different. So as you can see here, I have a lot of board affiliations with veterinarians. They are the single most important group for your pet, yet their ability to communicate is never taught in school, and it just sort of comes naturally or not, the latter being more often than not. I'm, of course, with the New York State Bar Association and the ABA, and I'm also affiliated, and I didn't put it on here because it was too much, with a bunch of dispute resolution groups. It is key for us, if we want to start our own practice in a certain niche area, to find out who needs us and help educate them. And if you're afraid of public speaking, like I was, you just need to take, what is it? I took one of the speaking training groups, Toastmasters, and just went and learned how to speak. Hopefully I'm doing it pretty well still, from point A to point B. It is important for you to be able to synthesize your message so people can understand it and so they can find you. And also being able to be remembered when you give this talk, so that people say, oh, wait, I heard somebody at such and such, and maybe you should reach out to her. So when I say that I am a mediator of conflicts between people over animals, most of the people say, oh, do you separate fighting dogs? And I tend to chuckle and say, I guess that's what it sounds like. However, the answer is absolutely no. I support mediation and collaborative discussions that help people who are fighting over the dogs. And I kid you not, I've also handled cases for cats, birds, horses, lizards, snakes, and ferrets, because all of these animals are beloved by people. And when things occur, mistreatment by a caregiver, if you have a animal sitter, a pet sitter, groomers, veterinarians, trainers, it really is something that can go to court, absolutely. However, I can tell you that most of my clients, if I get them before the attorneys get them, and I love attorneys very much, I happen to be one, if I can get them before the attorneys get them, their mantra usually is, I don't want this to happen to anybody else. And if you can help them foster that kind of resolution mindset, you can make a big difference for them, their pet, and the person who may or may not have created the issue that's they're in conflict with. So it's always important to support the people who are getting in touch with you. So right now I have this up here, but I think, Nikki, you have one that everyone can take. I put this in the notes because I wanted to make sure everyone got it when they got the PowerPoint. If everyone can get the PowerPoint, I sent it. But Nikki, if you could put up the questions now, I'd like to know who's here and how many of you have handled a case or a mediation that dealt with a conflict over an animal. So Nikki, if you could put that up, it worked before, but it might not work now, which is fine.
So I've actually left it up so people could kind of filter in and answer at their own speed.
Oh, good, because I can't see it, which is great. That's fine.
So let me read out. If anybody, I'm gonna leave the poll open for a few more seconds. If anybody who hasn't accessed it wants to throw in their votes, that would be great. And so just to
Nikki,
start.
Nikki, I don't see it on the screen either. I don't know whether others can. I can see the slide, but not the poll.
If you go to polls, I'm not sure actually how to share it while it's open. But if anybody can navigate towards at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if it's a small screen, it might be under the more section.
Okay.
Open the polls and click away so that your answers are recorded. But just, Deborah, to give you a sense of who we are here today, do you own a pet? 74% yes, 26% no. Is your pet considered your family member or your personal property? And for those of you who are participating maybe only by phone or don't have access to the poll, feel free to pop in a comment in the chat as well. So 74% say family member and 26% say both family member and personal property. Nobody has relegated their pet to just personal property. Have you mediated or litigated a conflict over a pet or involving a pet? 92% of the people who responded have engaged in mediation, 0 in litigation, and 8% in both, which is a little suspect, but this is the fun of statistics. And there's about 24 different individuals who have responded to that question out of everybody. And what did the pet matter involve? So 63%, it was in the context of divorce, 42% neighbor conflict, breeder owner 17%, veterinarian 25%, other service provider 21%, and a dog park about 16%. So as people are continuing to vote, I'll leave it open for a little bit, and then I can share.
Well, this is very telling. Thank you, Nikki, because, you know, we're all pet owners here. And well, not all of us, 29% of us aren't. And I want to really congratulate you because you're the most disenfranchised, usually, people in the universe. So I want to appreciate that. If you don't have a pet, that's absolutely okay. I often have to work with people who don't like pets, who are arguing with people who have pets that they don't necessarily keep in line. So I want to appreciate and acknowledge your position in this world as well. And as you can see, most people are listing their pets as family members. That's how they're held in our lifestyles. That's how they're held by us. However, in the courts, except for a little piece of domestic relations, they're considered personal property. So it's an interesting dichotomy on how we treat our pets, how we feel about our pets, and how the law feels about our pets, which is, of course, why I think mediation is the best avenue through which to resolve conflicts, because you can actually find someone to help you have this difficult conversation because emotions run high. So I'm so glad that so many people, thank you all for being part of this. I am going to stop share. Is that share results? Oh, here I can share results. I don't know. I'm going to pop out of this if I can. Let's see. Does it go away? It does not go away. There it is. Thank you. So I'm going to pop out of this. I'm going to go to the next slide. So if anyone feels so moved, and I would love it, to share, open your mic and share some of your experiences, good and bad, with actions that you've taken or cases you've had or mediations you've had that dealt with pets. I would love to be able to hear some of your wonderful stories or war stories. I remember walking with a mediator in Minnesota during a mediation conference I attended, probably 10 years ago. And he said the last case he would ever take in the world would be a case involving a pet in mediation. So if anyone wants to open their mic and say something, I'll give you a few minutes, because I would love to hear what you went through and how it worked before we move on, but I can move on as well. So Nikki, let me know if anyone is opening their mic.
There have been a couple of people popping in comments to the chat. Sarah
Perfect.
Barnes, if you wanna voice your comment, feel welcome. But there's a kind of breadth of experience with certainly mediations and other disputes involving pets in our audience. If anybody would like to unmute themselves and talk live, now is your moment.
I'm on my phone. I don't know. Did I unmute?
You
Yeah,
did.
you're good. We can hear you.
Oh, hi. Oh, good. Hi, Deborah. Nice to meet you. Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, I'm now the executive director of the Martha's Vineyard Mediation Program, and we've sort of become known recently in New England as a center that will take pet, mostly dog cases. And I've had really good success, particularly with ones that are referred by the ACOs. So that I think more outreach to the animal control officers would be wise. We're not looking for more business. We're actually a little overwhelmed. But my war story, and I don't want to take up a lot of time, was between 3 vets and an owner. All 3 vets had handled a crisis with the dog, and Boston dog lawyers were part of it. There's a law firm in Boston that specializes in dogs.
Jeremy Cohn. Yep.
Yeah. We did not get an agreement. That was a long 3-month process that was quite difficult. But, I'm not going to go into the details of it. It just, dealing with vets, I did not find to be as easy as dealing with neighbors. So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, I find that too, Sarah. And I find that when attorneys get involved, the chances of getting it to resolve a mediation go down by at least 50%. And I love Jeremy Cohen. I think he's a great guy, and I've done a lot of work with him. However, they're representing their client. And I've had so many mediations blow up because the attorneys are in the mediation with their clients and they're advocating. And I sit there and I go, this is the chance for your client and the other party to have a conversation about this. And they seem to think they need to really pontificate, which usually doesn't work. And I don't know, Sarah, if that was your case, but being able to speak to the clients directly is so much better. In the veterinary medicine field, I find that if the veterinarians will participate in mediation, it usually only occurs after a cause of action is brought. I have several really dear friends who are insurance defense attorneys who say there's really nothing to mediate, Deborah, until the client brings a cause of action. And I said, once they bring a cause of action, I said, then they're mad. And so that, that window that I spoke about at the beginning of, I just don't want this to happen to anybody else again, has been slammed shut and nailed shut, and drapes have been pulled. So to get them back to that ability to find a resolution that helps them and helps others going forward, accountability, responsibility, we'll talk about that, has been ended because everybody becomes adversarial. So that's why in pet issues, the pet is standing still. Nothing's happening to assist the pet, but the people are fighting with each other. Excuse me. The people are fighting with each other. So let's start. So let me take a minute now to bring you on the journey I took, because I can tell you that it's been an incredible journey. And I always thank Gary Friedman from the Center for Understanding. I took his training, and I said to him, I'd like to mediate conflicts between people over animals. What do you think? And he said, sure. So my success or my failure is directly related to Gary assuring me that that would work. And so I always thank him, because without his encouragement, I probably wouldn't have taken the leap, because I don't do anything else. I do help people learn how to speak to each other. I do conferences all over the country, speaking to breeders, owners, veterinarians, lawyers, everyone, on how to speak to your client when it comes to an animal. But I also do a number of mediations, and that's directly related to Gary. So how did I get here? So I started as an assistant district attorney in Westchester County. And while I was an assistant district attorney, I also showed my dogs in AKC. I was what was called a breeder owner handler. And if you're following the letters, you're seeing that I'm going down. I then had kids and went to the Metropolitan Transportation Authority Office of the Inspector General. So I was an assistant inspector general there. And then I took a few years off and became a member of the PTA, which I single-handedly believe created the need for me to become a mediator over a litigator, which I thought I would always be, because you can't throw, cranky parents in jail. You have to deal with them. So I learned a skill while I was vice president of the PTA that then created my practice in ADR, because I had to actively listen. I had to appreciate how they felt, because otherwise I didn't get any cookies at back to school night. And so it was very important for me to learn those skills, which I had not honed to my best advantage up to that point. And that's why ADR became such an important process for me to learn and then foster in conflicts over animals. Where am I? There it is. So these are my motivating forces. These are all my animals. So I now have an English Cocker Spaniel instead of a Dachshund. That's my horse, Art, my cat, Jane, and of course, everyone laying on top of me. If there could be one more space there, they would. But this is why I do what I do. I have shown dogs since I was 25 years old. So I'm in the AKC world, and believe me, they need mediation more than anyone. In fact, the AKC created the Work It Out booklet, which includes requirements or suggestions to go to mediation. And they set up a whole program with CPR. I don't know if Noah's on the call, but they set up a whole program to go to CPR and have CPR help people who are arguing over, ownership or different aspects of the dog show world. They wanted to use their own mediators that were delegates to the AKC, which of course made me a little suspect. I don't know if Noah's on and how he felt. It was very different because it wasn't as if they were using CPR as mediators. They were using CPR as people who would facilitate the process, but then delegates from various breed clubs would be the trained mediators. And they actually asked our own Simeon Baum to train the delegates on how to mediate. So it was quite the effort that went forward. And I think that was in January of 2017. And that was after I published my book in 2015. So I guess that was about 8 years after I had started that AKC put mediation front and center in their processing. And I actually wrote an article for Canine Chronicle stating that mediation went mainstream in AKC, which I was very happy to, in whatever way I did, facilitate them considering it as a means of resolving conflicts over animals. So in 2010, I didn't do any other mediation except mediation of conflicts over animals. What I didn't realize at the time was that no one in the animal law or conflict field was ready for mediation, because in the scheme of things, people litigated when disagreements arose over their pets. They litigated. That's what they did. They never had access to mediation unless they were getting divorced. That was a big one. But when they had breeder, owner, handler conflicts, the attorneys pushed them to litigate because they had a contract and they could sue on the contract, which never works for anyone. We all know that. It's better to have a conversation. So I didn't realize that they weren't ready for it. And I can say that the animal law world was definitely not ready for me because they want to set precedent. And of course, mediation doesn't set precedent. So for me, it was really something that I had to learn how to work around. So now let's look at where conflicts over animals occur and where mediation may better serve the parties. So if you're divorcing with pets, that's one thing. If you have an emotional support animal or service animal, that's something that you need to pay attention to. Relationship breakups, different from divorce. Of course, you should know, and you probably know, that the domestic relations law only is supposed to be applied to divorce. However, it has been applied to relationship breakups. So also there are contracts between breeders, owners, rescues, shelters. And I can tell you that most of my legal colleagues never read the contract they sign when they rescue an animal because they're doing a corporal work of mercy. And I sit there and I go, you should really read it, because it was written usually by some really smart attorneys because they were working pro bono, and it's pretty airtight. So you might want to think about what you've just signed. On the other hand, the breeders never have an attorney review their contract usually until after they have to enforce it. And of course, you know how that goes. That's almost a nightmare. Veterinarian disagreements. This is more common. And in fact, I just spoke with a communication professor at the University of Arizona's vet school. And she said, the new veterinarians don't want anybody to question them. She said, it's really difficult. So veterinary medicine is trying to teach veterinarians to be better at asking curious questions. However, they're not there yet. And so these disagreements blow up because veterinarians need to be right over getting it right. And I'm working with the entire industry to try to help them understand that to listen actively will give them a better understanding of what their client wants, as opposed to presuming, and we all know that that happens a great deal with our clients, presuming what the other person is thinking. Domestic violence and animals, this is something that I did a program at the University of Tennessee in their social work group on domestic violence and animals. It really is something that is quite near and dear to me. And mediation may not necessarily be the best fix. However, it does create the ability to have a conversation, and often have a conversation about the animal. Co-ops and condos. I know that colleagues of mine on the New York City bar, DR, work in condos and co-ops for mediation. If you live in a condo or co-op that allows animals, there's always an issue. If you live in a condo or co-op that doesn't allow animals, then there's an issue, because they get in for ESA or service animals, and no one ever explains to them the limitations of an ESA or a service animal. So then conflicts arise. Dog bites. I think mediation is sometimes the better fix for that. Especially if someone gets injured. However, insurance companies don't necessarily look at it as the first line of action. Neither do attorneys. Trusts and estates, talking about the pets of your parents. I have so many people who come up to me and say, listen, my mother wants me to take the old dog with the terrible breath and everything else, and I don't want to. If you can have this conversation in mediation, guided by someone who is going to help you understand and appreciate how people feel, the pets are not left behind. Animal rights and welfare, as I said before, not really ready to use mediation as fully as possible because there is this need to set precedent. However, animals stand still, and I'm a proponent of, if we show them that it works, if we work out a next step that everyone agrees to take, and you show people that it works, that it doesn't create the issues they're afraid of, then you can sometimes incrementally move to what's better for the animals without having to set laws and have precedent set. I mean, who's enforcing this? It's just my thought that sometimes it's better to get a little piece of the pie first than the big piece of the pie, so that people can move forward. There's a gentleman out there, Sean Heinrich, who shows movies to people who collect shark fins and stingray lungs because they have medicinal purposes. And what he did was he took movies of these animals in the wild, which the people who are harvesting them had never seen. And so maybe it won't change the minds of the people who are harvesting them, but it may change the minds of their children. And it's a process. Oh, sorry, let me go back. So the last but not least are dog parks. That's a hotbed because no one ever pays attention to their dogs. If any of you have been at a dog park, nobody pays attention to their dogs' fights that come out. I have a good friend, Beth Chisholm, who is working on an outline for how to run a good dog park. So stay tuned for that. And of course, dog sports, which is the AKC, which is the agility groups, which is the hunting groups, which is, there are so many things that dogs do, and people are emotional about their dogs and don't necessarily have the ability to work together and play nicely in the sandbox.
Debra, I wanted to just chime in and see if you would pause to take two questions. There have been
Oh,
questions
absolutely.
building up. People are very passionate about this
Absolutely.
issue. But I wanted to first hand over the virtual microphone to Michelle Chilton, who I think has a war story about a neighbor dispute regarding a pet. Michelle, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Hi, my name is Michelle Chilton, and I'm the mediation facilitator / outreach coordinator for neighborhood dispute settlement in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I also mediate on different occasions, but I do mainly with the intake and scheduling. And so I get the calls when individuals in our top 3 areas of major disputes are neighbor to neighbor, landlord, tenant, and custody and divorce. And so my experiences with animals typically are on the neighbor to neighbor side. A neighbor, one of the neighbor dogs is pooing on the property.
And nobody's picking it up. Yes.
Yes, and it seems to be intentional sometimes. And so the just thinking of the one situation, it didn't rise to the level of mediation. It didn't get that far. I think eventually things kind of work themselves out. But, you know, so when I was trying to answer the question, was it mediation or have you handled mediation or had it litigation? I was like, well, technically neither, because it didn't reach that level. So maybe I guess that next question, have you been involved with any type of, you know, dispute or, you know, challenges? Because I wanted to answer it so bad, but I felt like, it's not quite true. I didn't, but I'm sure you probably, you know, have an issue. And also, I did, was another situation where it was a service dog. And so this was the landlord tenant situation. And, you know, where someone has a service dog or emotional support dog. And I'd say probably more with the emotional support dog, where I think they may have been pooing in different places and sort of nipping at the heels, pun intended there.
Yes.
At, you know, of other people. So I don't know how you work with mediators to try to, you know, keep the peace on properties and in the neighborhood. So
Well,
thank you.
isn't that, thank you, Michelle. Those are two great questions, and I'm going to answer them both. Isn't that really the strength of mediation, is that we can have that conversation where a neutral coming in, you know, we don't hold a position, and we can actually hold a safe position for both people. So when the, I'm going to let my dog relieve itself on your lawn because I don't like you, or you leave your light on all night, and so I'm going to have my dog poo on your lawn. It really is a case of, it can escalate, especially in this day and age. So to be able to nip that in the bud, no pun intended, and have a mediator come in and speak to the people, even if instead of bringing those two people in who may be too hot under the collar to have them come in, have a neighborhood discussion, and maybe they will come, maybe they won't come, have it televised, to be able to talk about what you can do, how you might be able to have a conversation, ask curious questions. I always like to bring the two people who are having the disagreement over. I know that Gary Friedman always talks about his two neighbors who had a problem with a fence. And he said, it's really hard to bring two people who are your neighbors in to talk about a fence when you live in the neighborhood. However, if you bring a mediator in who can help these people with the pet, with the, you know, different things that they're doing to aggravate the other, it sometimes can have you ask curious questions, find the underlying issues that are creating this tit for tat, so to speak, and enable them to get over it. And it makes the whole neighborhood better, because, you know, when that's happening, the rest of the neighbors are like, oh my God, Joe's going to come out and shoot Bill for letting his dog, maybe figuratively, not literally, but in this day and age, who knows? So you really want to work on that. You really want to create some sort of a process. If you have an HOA or you have a community center, like it seems you do, Michelle, where you can say, listen, we'd like to bring in, I used to go to shelters all the time and bring in the volunteers, the veterinarians, and the administrators, and have them have a conversation. And they had never talked to each other before, ever. And so they all had these preconceived ideas of what everybody thought of the other. And then they realized that wasn't true at all. And it created this ability for them to take a moment, take a breath, and not, you know, be childish and let your dog go to the bathroom on somebody's lawn. For the second one, it really is a matter of education. I speak to a number of psychologist groups who want to know how to give out ESAs and what they need to do. And I always say to them, some smart attorney somewhere is going to implead you for giving the certificate to this dog to be an ESA in a no pet building, and it bites somebody, because you were the one who actually created the wheels in motion to allow that dog into that building. The other piece is that they never educate the people on the limitations of ESA. ESA is only in your apartment. If you go out into the hall, ESA no longer covers your pet. Nobody talks about it. It like drives me out of my mind. So what you want to do is, as a psychologist, and if you want to give someone an ESA, you want to make sure that you're not going to evaluate their pet. First of all, you have no idea how to evaluate a pet and whether a pet should be in a common area. But you want to hire an animal behaviorist or work with an animal behaviorist to give the party who you're giving this letter to the understanding that this dog can or cannot go into this situation or that situation. And the group that is allowing you to have your ESA in the no pet building or in the airplane needs to tell you, this is where the dog can sit, and this is how you need to have control over the dog. I work with Gary Norman, who's a blind lawyer, brilliant. He's an LLM. He's like the smartest guy I've ever met. And he has educated me on the fact that you can even ask a service animal to leave a facility if it's misbehaving, because both an ESA and a service animal have to be under control at all times. And let's not even start about therapy dogs who don't fit into any of those categories. And so don't get to have any of that, but also should be under control at every time, at every moment. In fact, there's a big therapy dog symposium this Friday that I'm speaking at in New Jersey, because it is important to create the understanding of what your limitations are with both a service animal, an emotional support animal, and a therapy dog. But if you have an issue with an emotional support animal, it's because the person who received the paperwork, usually over the internet, has no idea what the limitations are on it. I hope that answered your question. Are there any more, Nikki, that you want me to?
There's one more, and then I
Sure.
don't want to break your flow because you've got
No,
too
that's
much
fine.
great information to share with us. But I'm going to pass now the mic to William Sparks. And William, if you keep your question
Hey,
really
Bill, how are you?
Hi, Deborah.
brief.
I got a quick question and then a comment that relates to the same building. I'm in my home in Long Island, but at our condo in the city, which is a typical large building on the west side of Manhattan, the bylaws of the building, Deborah, have breed-specific prohibitions. In other words, unrelated to the nature of the dog or anything else, they prohibit owners or residents from having a Rottweiler, a Doberman, and one other breed in the building. I'd ask you just to comment on, I'm sure that is typical of other buildings in the city, condos or co-op. Would you please comment on whether those are legal, and if an owner can do anything about those, or whether we are stuck with those?
Well, I think that the owner should sit down with, whoops, sorry, I had an English cocker knock my computer down. I think the owners should actually sit down and talk with management about why it's there. You know, ask those curious questions. You know that, Bill, because we're mediators. Ask those curious questions, why these are here. Have we had issues with these dogs? Because it isn't necessarily the Rottweilers or the Pit Bulls who cause the issue. It's sometimes the Yorkshire Terriers and the Chihuahuas who bite people. So it's not something that is dispositive of keeping your group safe. And I think they just don't know that. So to have a less confrontational, more curious, informational conversation, I facilitate those all the time, because it really is, you have to stop. I don't believe New York, and please, anyone who can correct me, I would be happy to be corrected. I don't think New York allows for breed specific comments or limitations. You'd have to bring it up in court. Who wants to do that? So that's why I would prefer to have a conversation, let them know that really breed specific limitations like this don't work. And it's a collaborative conversation, a congenial conversation, not you're
Right.
stupid, don't do it. And it's, let's see something that would work better. Why don't we make sure that people take responsibility courses for the care of their pets, so they know what they have to do to make sure it can live in an environment like this. There are many of those out there. I don't believe it's legal. I think it could be challenged, Bill, but I'm not, William, but I'm not so sure that that's worth your time or effort. I think it's because you have to live there, right? So that's always the trade-off. So often it's about having a conversation, asking curious questions, asking why they put this in there, what precipitated it, and whether or not something that was more indicative of recognizing dogs who may not fit into this environment over leaving out dogs that are huge. Now, there is a huge segment of the population, probably some of the 26 people who said they don't have a pet, who are afraid of dogs. And those people get no voice in the world when they buy in a no-pit building and then they see a Rottweiler in the elevator. It's like holy Toledo. However, you have to recognize that if yours is an ESA Rottweiler, then you need to make sure you ask permission to get into the elevator.
Yeah.
If you have a pet friendly building, you should still ask. You know, that old adage, being a good neighbor is really important because people are afraid of big dogs. I never allow my dogs to walk up to anyone and say hello because they're big, they're Irish setters. Actually, the one that's the most trouble now is the English Cocker, and she's small. So, you know, it is not size. It's the training and responsibility of the owner that really should be considered when making these rules and regulations. I hope that answered your question, Bill.
Yes, it does. I just want to make one quick comment that relates to this building. Something you said was so critical. My next door neighbor passed away quickly in my building, and she did not have any provision in either a will or a trust relating to her cats. And what happened was the NYPD took those beloved animals of hers before anything else could happen. And I assume, I really don't know what they did with them, but before any family members of hers, and I knew her for years, could come and take them to their homes, they took them. And I just want to say to you, thanks to you, Deborah, I immediately drafted a provision for, God forbid, something should happen to me and my partner, so that, you know, we both got hit by a bus or killed in a car accident. I know what will happen to my two dogs.
Well, I'm so glad. Yeah, that's the MAP plan. Anyone who goes to my website, you'll see this MAAP and you're wondering what's that about. Well, it's navigating the journey your pet takes when you can't care for it, especially during COVID, because people went to the hospital, like William said, and they didn't come home, and their pets were left uncared for because they didn't know they were going to be admitted. And some of them went to animal care and control. So if you have a pet, make sure you have a notice somewhere that can be easily seen by the EMS workers that are carrying you out on a stretcher, that the dogs should not be removed from the house. Call this number. This person will take my dogs, because otherwise they go to animal care and control. And if you're on a ventilator, you're not answering your phone to say, yes, I want my dogs back. And your dogs could get into the system, get into a shelter or a rescue, be adopted, and then you can never get them back, because really smart attorneys have written those rescue contracts. Remember that I said? So you'll never get them back. So make sure if you have a pet tonight when you go home, put something up somewhere that someone can see that says, in the event of an emergency, do not remove my pets. Call this number. This person will take care of my pets, and they will abide by that. I do this every first and third. You just missed it. The first and third Wednesdays is a free call that I talk to people about how to make these plans for their pets, because I'm not doing trust and estates. That's like divorce. I don't do trust and estates either. However, I help the trust and estate attorney navigate what these crazy people who own pets want for their pets. I help people have reality checks, make a plan for their pet, and then plug that in. So you're absolutely right, William. If we don't make a plan for our pets, that's going to be a problem if we're carried out and the pets, go to animal care and control. They're either left and they don't have any food or water, which is so terrible. But then animal care and control comes and then they don't. So I really appreciate that that information, and I'm so glad you took my words and implemented them, because it's so important. So to get back to this, in conflicts over animals, litigation and setting precedent is preferred in the animal law, animal welfare group. The animal laws mantra, and I love that Jim Gisoldi's here, and I mean this with all love and affection, Jim, they want to be right for animals. They want to make sure that they get it right for the animals. They want to be right for the animals. I want to get it right for the animals. I want to make sure that whatever we're doing moving forward, mediation, I think, is the best way to do that, is to make incremental plans where everyone who fears that this isn't going to work on both sides understands that if they make little incremental steps, that they are going to get it right for the pets, and they can keep moving forward for the benefit of the pets. The pets don't stand still. So the emotions that are involved in conflicts over animals look like this. So this is what I see in my office. Many of you may see this in your office. When the pet owners come in, they need to feel heard. They're afraid. They are terrible listeners. They will finish your sentence for you, and that's not exactly what you or the other party wanted to say, going back to Bill and the, or Michelle and the pooping on the lawn. They just don't listen. And they need to be champions for their pets, even though their pets might not be innocent in whatever is coming up. They want to be the champions for their pets. On the other side, you have service providers, veterinarians, who are told by their insurance companies, don't listen. We'll take care of it. And then the insurance companies don't listen, and then everything escalates. Or they're afraid of the law. I have a video out there that's probably 10 years old. I look so much better in it, that says, if you have an argument with your neighbor over their barking dog, please don't go over when you're angry, and talk to them, because they're afraid. They're afraid of what you're going to do. You're going to call animal care and control, and then their dogs would be taken away. So they've run this whole scenario in their head, and so they don't open the door. Rather, take them out for coffee and talk about what you can do to help allow the dog to bark, because all dogs bark, but also allow you to sleep if, say, you're a night worker like a policeman or a medical professional. They are also terrible listeners, and often they need to win for so many reasons that I won't go into now, but they need to win. They need to be right. So do pet owners, but not to the greatest degree as people who are in the industry and feel I have to be right and you have to be wrong. And I'm working on that. It's a little difficult. So why mediation works? Well, we all know this, because if mediators are involved, people are assisted in actively listening to the other party, which they've never done. Sometimes they hear things for the first time. We all know that. They get to tell their side of the story fully. Like, I'm not completing your sentence. I am going to actually be made to listen to the whole story, and then I can hit my head like I've had a V8. And I didn't know that's what you meant when you said that. How many of us have heard that? And then they are given the opportunity to understand the other side's point of view. So most of the time, they never listen long enough to really understand the other party or to hear the other party. So it really works to everyone's advantage. And the pet's best interests are always kept top of mind in mediation. It is one of the most impactful things for me. And also, as we know, if it doesn't work in mediation, you can go to court, you can go to trial, you can, sue everybody you want. However, why wouldn't you want to try to have a conversation first before, burning every bridge? I work with AKC breeders, owners, their clubs. Oh my God, what a dysfunctional bunch. The movie Best in Show is so true. And I often say to them, you're going to see this person every weekend because you show the same kind of dog, you stand around the ring, you're in the same neighborhood. Why are you burning this bridge? But they have to be right, and they don't ever listen to the story. So I try to keep everyone focused on what's in the best interest of the pet going forward. And then pets are not property in mediation. That is such an important piece. They can be anything in mediation. And also, I believe the next one says it's confidential, user-friendly, and helps build a solution you cannot get in court. And we'll go into that a little more fully later. So under the law, pets are property. They only want to hear the facts. Emotion is, in this day and age, it's sort of kind of taken in, but it shouldn't be. And it's not necessarily requested or considered. However, the people in court, as we said, the pets are not property. They're their family members. And unfortunately, your pet doesn't hate your ex. You wish they would. I often tell that to people when we start a mediation. Remember that if you weren't in the room, you're the primary caregiver. If you weren't in the room, your pet would go to your ex. I know how hard that is for you to even comprehend, but it's true. And if in fact we go to court and we win custody and everything is shut off and I never get to see my pet again, the pet loses a plan for long or short-term care because that other party who's fighting for the care of this pet is now completely obliterated. There's no shared custody that I'm aware of. So they've lost someone who could take care of them if something happened, but I talk more about that later. Remember, as mediators, we do not, will not, cannot walk in the pet owner's shoe. Please don't try to have them do what you would do in this. We know better, but just I always have to say that. Pet owners need the opportunity to make the decision that reflects their own life experiences. It could take them 4 days to get there. You could have gotten there in 20 minutes. I get it. However, I have had so many people say, well, Deborah, why don't you tell us what you want to do? And I go, well, this isn't my disagreement. This is yours. And I never want you to come back to me and say, but Deborah, you told me to do it this way. So don't get trapped by them asking you that. And I know none of you will because you're all brilliant, but just, you know, it's worth repeating. I often help the parties find the words that diffuse the anger that they're bringing to the discussion. And by diffusing that anger, it sometimes fosters outcomes that serve them all. Do not presume to know what is best for them and their pets, regardless of your familiarity. And I have to remind I put this in here for myself more than anyone else, because, you know, because I'm in the law, I'm in the breeding, I'm in everywhere. I have to really, I have there, see the word duct tape. I often, when I do mediations, and now we're doing them over Zoom, but when I did them in person, I would have duct tape on the table and I would tell people this is to remind me to keep my mouth shut. And if none of you or any of you have read STFU by Dan Lyons, that is my mantra, because I do try to remember not to tell people what they should do, but to help them find their way on their own. Oh, what's happening? It's not moving. Why is it not moving? Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. So back to divorce, because it is the most prevalent one now in New York State. 5 states have codified through legislation a manner in which pets are to be treated in divorce. Alaska, Illinois, California, New Hampshire, New York. Actually, there are 7 now. There's Maine and DC also have, and most of them have best interests. Illinois is the only one with well-being, along with New Hampshire. It's something that we really have to pay attention to. And it's supposed to, the domestic relations law is supposed to be applied to only divorce. However, it's been applied to relationship breakups now as well. So the pros of the new legislation are that pets are no longer simply property, right? And we have the ability to have a judge help us make a decision. Pets are now recognized and considered family members and companions. They're given more of a place in the discussion. Evidence is taken from the parties on their relationship with the pets. Are there any questions, Nikki, I need to address, or we're good?
We're good for now. There's plenty for the break time.
Great. This includes where animals thrive, is loved, and feels loved. My nightmare is Raymond v. Lockman. I have to tell you that I love that discussion in Raymond. However, it tends to have judges make a decision based on where the dog is living, as opposed to who was the primary caregiver or how the pet could be shared. And it calls for more oversight by the court, which whether or not the court is happy about that. I did a program for FDMC with Judge Cooper. And when I was speaking to him before we spoke, I said to him, so what happens when you award the dog to A, and A loses their job, loses their house, passes away, whatever, what happens to the pet? He goes, well, I never thought of that. And I said, yeah, that's something you really need to think of, because both these people love this animal. And yet when you make this decision, giving the dog to one or the other, or the cat to one or the other, then there's no real room to assure that this pet is cared for, as William said, long term. So these are the cons of the new legislation so far. And please correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I have not yet. And people send me things. Feel free to send me anything you read that you think would be of interest to me. Don't presume I've seen it. I know Jim Gesualdi and a few others have sent me articles that have been wonderful, and some of them I've seen before, some of them I haven't. So I'm always welcoming people who have eyes in the back of their head for me. So far, I don't think any shared custody has been awarded by the court. They would rather rip their eyeballs out than have to have somebody come in and tell them that the shared custody isn't working out, please. That's what mediation is for. Often award the pet to the property where the pet resides. I mean, one case, Acosta v. Shaw, they stole the dog and had it for 1.5 years waiting for the court to hear the case. And I sat there and I said, yes, but are you kidding? But that's that, pesky Raymond v. Lockman. Well, it was love there and it knew love. And I'm like, oh my God, that's why mediation is so much better. I don't have an opinion in this, as you can tell. Judges usually make their decision based on a one-day presentation of information. That's Travis. Are you kidding me? You've lived with your pet for so long. How can you present in one day a case? I think Elsie and Cece, the wife where the Rottweiler, speaking of Rottweilers, resided, the guy couldn't find housing where he could take Rottweilers. That's something, that's a thing, right? So he left them where they were loved, but he was the prime caregiver and he, wanted to share them. And she said, yeah, they really missed him. They loved him. He was the primary caregiver. I took care of them too, and they gave it to her solely, which, I just have an issue with that. It's just me. I don't have an opinion. Purchase and ownership documents are not dispositive. I have a mediation I did that fell apart because the ownership papers, the owner of the mother and the father of the litter of puppies meant nothing in Florida. And the possession meant everything. And again, Raymond v. Lockman, where they knew love, this was their only mother. And the judge decided to give the puppies to someone who had whelped a litter for the owner. How does that work? It's just, it bends your mind. Of course, there's no plan for long-term financial care for the pets. You really need to make sure that these pets are loved by these two people. And we need to make sure that if something happens to one of them, or something happens to the pet and they can't afford to care for it, that there's some ability to have a conversation. And also there's no right of first refusal upon the death of the possessory owner. Where does the pet go? Does it go to a shelter? That would be awful, since I know that I would want my dog back, and most of you would want your dog back if in fact you lost in court, but the person died, and as William said, the animals are gone and nobody let you know. So court decisions being made under these new directives are subjective, apply only for full custody, do not leave a first right of refusal, financial assistance and communication end, and that really, again, affects the pet. No discussions of return upon death. It really is too much. There we go. Okay, I don't know what's going on here, but I got to get through this. There we go. Each state's legislature creates the guidelines requiring judges to consider well-being or best interests. What they do not create and have not created is a uniform method of evaluating this process. And the judges really have been troubled by this because they use their own pet ownership experiences, which of course can be subjective. Their perspectives can be different. They might be biased. Whichever judge you get, is that the outline and the outcome you're going to get? We need to have something better than just a line in legislation that gives a judge the ability to make these decisions for the pet owners. And that's why, for me, mediation can be so important for the better outcome for all, especially the pet. Limited case law suggests that in the future, states may follow the best interest standard over the well-being standard. Travis v. Murray was actually the best for all concerned, and that somehow got lost in the mix when the legislation was written. I don't know how that was done, but it was. And visitation in court decisions might not be included or enforceable. Courts are unwilling or unable to monitor it. That's a great article that I suggest you read, because courts really don't want. They have their plates full with child custody visitation. They don't want to really get up there with animal visitation, which is why they always come down with one or the other. As a mediator, our role is that of the active listener, and we provide a venue in which the parties find the best outcome on their own. This is really why in pet disputes, mediators are crucial. Active listening is never done in pet issues because it's so emotional. And it provides a separate venue in which everyone can have that conversation and work on what the best outcome would be on their own for their pet collaboratively. I once put up I think a discussion about Travis, and one party commented, well, if they really love the pet, they would pay for the surgery if something came up, because I think I said, but this doesn't really enable parties to work together in case the dog needs a surgery or whatever. And I said, you're absolutely right. But how do we communicate with each other, since after the divorce, I never want to see you again. I never want to talk to you again, or the relationship breakup. And, you know, how do I get in touch with you? And will you be very angry so that when I call you, say, well, you should have thought of that before, and the pet will suffer. So that's why mediation is the best fix here. The court in LeConte put a fine point on why it is necessary to have an informal agreement for the pets. I always push this when people are getting married. My son's getting married. And I said to him, I want you to have an agreement with your fiance that both of you will share the pet going forward, because you're sharing the pet now, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, then you need to do that. You might not share it a week on, a week off, which I'm totally against that, but you might share it for vacations. You might share it for, you know, the summer. You might share it for some, you know, period of time, so that the cat recognizes that it has two people in case something happens to you. This informal agreement, because legislation has not provided guidelines for the court to use as a catch-all to address specific facts of each case. So I really think that mediation provides us with that ability to make that informal agreement. Okay, I don't really want to share, or the pet will not survive a shared custody. However, it really needs to have the time and the place to be able to be in each other's custody. I often say to people who come to my office and say, yes, but I never want to see him again. And I said, well, you know, good thing there are so many cottage industries that will help you transport your pet from point A to point B. And all you need is a Google Calendar. And that's what you list. I had a couple who were stealing the dog out of each other's backyards on last outs. One lived in Virginia and one lived in British Columbia. So there were so many laws being broken, it was beyond and it took me about 6 months to have them come together, then about 6 months to have them have a conversation and, you know, drop sort of an agreement. And as mediators, we know that when those agreements are drawn up, if our gut is not in it, we have to take a break. So I took a break, and I think I took a break for about a month, and they both called me back and said, we're ready to go forward. And for sure, then I knew they were ready to go forward, because you never want to make an agreement that somebody does simply because they want it over with. I just had a case of a relationship breakup, and one party kept saying, I'll pay for that. I'll pay for that. Yes, I'll do that. I'll do that. And I actually, after 4 hours, called the mediation and said, let's just sleep on this. I know you've said you'll do everything, and we really want to do everything, but I want to know that you understand completely what it is that we're all agreeing to do here. And within 48 hours, she had called and said, I'm not doing that. I have to go to litigation. Now, I was disappointed she wouldn't come back to mediation. However, I knew that she wanted her way, and she wasn't really listening to the breadth of conversation that was going on. And her attorney wasn't necessarily helping in that, you know, understanding. So they're going to litigation. And I said to them, I hope that, you know, I can help in mediation later. Once you find out that in litigation, this is not necessarily going to work out in your best interest. So, you know, we as mediators have to really take the time to understand where the parties are, and if we can help them take stock and take a minute to breathe, that's really important too. What mediators should help judges do when they are faced with pet disagreements in a divorce relationship or any other, I mean, breeder contract, you name it. Strongly suggest the parties participate in mediation to decide who gets the pet or what the issues are. I always say that in divorce cases, having an animal behaviorist help evaluate the pet and the pet's ability to go back and forth, because some presume that the pet can't possibly go back and forth, and others presume that the pet can go back and forth, and that would really be a detriment to the pet. So animal behaviorists give you that extra piece of information that really will help you. It's sort of like having a child specialist come in, right? To have you discuss what it is that would be best for the pet. I am a big proponent of not automatically deciding the pet should go anywhere, either to remain in the marital home or to go to someone else. Really keeping them in their homes do make them feel secure. However, most pets, and that's why the animal behaviorist is going to be brought in, will be able to go back and forth if they're with a person who has loved them and where they felt love. It's not the place, it's the person. So helping judges understand that, which is what's left out of Lockman, is important. Arrangements should be made to assure the pet is maintained in its current standard of care physically and financially. I have to tell you that is never the case when these cases are decided. Often the pet goes to the person who has no money. And so how is that pet going to be cared for? Now, will the other party keep the pet insurance up? Will the other party come forward if the pet needs care or food or whatever? Bringing it to court is not necessarily dispositive on finding the best outcome for the pet. It is dispositive on finding out the best outcome for me over you, because I should have the pet and you shouldn't, which is why we should really try to educate judges in sending this to mediation first. And in my opinion, and this is my opinion and I hold it strongly and I don't speak about it much, the pet should be returned to the ex-pet owner if the possessory pet owner can no longer care for the pet. And that's what Judge Cooper never really considered when he was going to have that hearing about the dog. I think his name was Frankie. I think that was Frankie. What happens? There needs to be some connectivity, because if I'm going to spend $10,000 litigating this to get this pet back, surely at the end of the day, if the possessory owner, whoever gets possession of the owner of the pet, can't keep it anymore, I should be the first person who is called to take the pet. That is not part of the decisions that I've seen in court. It could be dicta that the judge might say that isn't part of the decision. However, we all know how we can enforce that, not much. So mediation of pet conflicts allows for the discussion of the uncomfortable present and future challenges, the information, and reduces reactivity and defensiveness. It provides that information because that's what we do. We listen and we hold a safe space. And so that reactivity and defensiveness, that amygdala response is respected, understood, and then the ability to breathe is created so that we can get back into our prefrontal cortex. Everyone fully participates in the solution. And believe it or not, everyone who is in conflict over the animal can appreciate, take accountability, and take responsibility, which of course I don't have agree here, because none of those mean that you're going to agree. It means that you are going to appreciate how someone else feels, and we are going to work this out if we appreciate and take accountability and responsibility. So consider the statement in 2020 in Time magazine where Paul, a 59-year-old guy from Rhode Island, was weeping after his wife decided he could no longer see their two dogs. I think they'd been sharing them for like a year. It was torturous to him, and so he went to court. And in our whole divorce, that was the only thing that could hurt me. And I have to say, and some of you might have experiences where people do this just to hurt the other party. Domestic violence is huge in this this part of the world. Animals are used all the time to keep people in line. And so for me, it's really important that we address that we make sure that if in fact, if in fact somebody has an issue with a pet, that there's always that heir and a spare. There's always somebody there, that you can't take the pet. I've had colleagues who've told me, yeah, they got the dog and then they went down to the shelter, dropped it off, and there was no recourse for the other party. We don't want to ever have that happen, and that's why mediation helps not to do that. In Mitchell v. Snyder, the court applied the best for all concept of Travis. It discussed the following tangible factors that need to be considered in determining which party will better promote the well-being of the pet. The dog has a better chance of prospering, loving and be loved in the care of one party or the other who is in a position, but they never talk about long-term, short-term care. They only talk about that one day, who can fit this bill. And if they can't fit it tomorrow, there's no plan for that next case, which is why mediation is so much better. By facilitating mediation of these questions, you're going to really address the care of the pet in a conflict as well as the placement of the pet. Mediators in the best position to foster an intentional discussion by the parties about their beloved pet and assure that they keep that, not that I want to get even with you, that I don't want to ever see you again, that I don't want you to ever see the pet again, whatever. And the anger of the breakup or conflict over possession is diminished, and the well-being of the pet is kept top of mind. So although courts now have the ability to consider the best interests, I love what Judge Mintz said on my podcast, which was, and we all know this, why would you give the decision-making power for the future of your beloved animal to a person just because he wears a black coat? I mean, really, or a black robe? Why would you do that? But people do it all the time because they're going to know. And I know how the judge is going to feel, so that's why I'm going to take it to court. That was the case where the woman agreed to do everything and then came back 48 hours later and said, no, I'm not. I know the judge is going to give the dog to me because she has a tattoo of the dog on her arm. I don't know that that's dispositive, but maybe it will be. I'll keep you posted. So in my practice, I just wanted to share with you, this is my giveaway for all my veterinarians and all my pet service providers and my breeders. I send this to them so they can keep it somewhere. In fact, Dr. Dave Nickel over in England said, I have this taped to my computer because when I get angry with someone or I'm thinking about getting angry with someone, I stop, drop, and roll, which means stop talking and listen. We all know that. Drop the need to be right. You are. They can't tell you you're wrong, but listen more closely because I say that you might be righter if you listen more closely. And then let what they say roll off your back. That's returning to your prefrontal cortex from your amygdala, right? That's exactly what we're doing. I love this quote from Maya. So especially in my practice, I did the best I could until I knew better. And then I know better now, so I'm doing better. We should all try to do that as part of our, mediation practices, whatever is your passion. Like mine is conflicts over pets. Just do what you can, and then when you know better, do it better, and make sure you keep everything and everyone top of mind in this more peaceful process. Here are my contact information. I think I left about 10 minutes for questions. I hope that's enough, Nikki. And I will stop sharing. And if anyone needs to get in touch with me, I know that this PowerPoint is available to everyone. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Yes.
Here we go.
Thank you so much. There is just so much information. A lot of the questions have been coming in. We have about 10 or 12 minutes for on the record questions. What I'd like is, and people are applauding you both in the chat and with the visual hand. So I hope you can see and feel the love for the amazing breadth and wealth of information that you just gave. What I'd like to do is maybe I'll start with one of the questions that came up in the chat and encourage people to kind of gather their thoughts and raise your virtual hand or pop a note in the chat.
Well, that is rather bizarre.
A live question.
That they would not.
And let me know if I hear unkind of announced noises. I will mute you because I'm a stickler for that. But one of the breadth of overarching questions, kind of pulling elements from a couple of audience members, was one, what kinds of different pets do you deal with? And is there any difference between pets that are actually working or of an agricultural nature and pets that are more kind of, what we might consider more of a pet? So a working animal versus a pet maybe. So what's the kind of universe of different types of beasts that you deal with? And do you see any distinctions among the different roles of these animals in people's lives?
Well, I'm Noah's Ark. I have handled horses, I've handled cattle, I've handled sheep and goats and llamas. It's all about the attachment to the animal. So if they're working animals, it might be a different philosophy. Like I often chime in with the horses that are used as carriage horses. And I've offered my services several times there to facilitate a conversation, because it's such a disconnected conversation. Everyone wants what's best for the horses. Let's try to have that conversation. So across the gamut, most of my cases come from divorcing or contract issues with breeders, or contract issues with kennels, something went wrong, groomers, something went wrong, veterinarians, big. It's a little difficult with veterinarians because the insurance companies don't let them mediate until the client sues them, which of course, as I said at the beginning, loses that wonderful point where the client calls me and says, I just don't want this to happen again. And most veterinarians want to talk to their clients, but are advised by their insurance companies not to. And that really creates an issue for the veterinarians. If you saw in my bio at the front, when I said I joined all these places, one of them is NOMV, not One More Vet. I don't know if you know that veterinary medicine is one of the highest professions of suicide, because the stress and pressure they work under, both for the cost of their education and then the way they're treated by clients or by staff members. So I am advocating for mediation to be used, or to be allowed to be used by veterinarians early for its confidential nature. And that the insurance companies wouldn't deny coverage if it didn't work out, or if there was a report to the licensing bureau, that they would defend them. I hope that answers the question, Nikki.
Absolutely, absolutely. So another question, and I just wanted to mention that I was actually working at CPR when the AKC initiative was launched, and it really is very interesting, and I think speaks to one of the nice things about your career path is that you really have been out there connecting the different communities that can benefit from mediation. Just like you said, you're talking with vets. We need to get you talking with the people at the insurance companies too. I know more and more people are purchasing insurance. It's becoming more and more expensive to care for your pets. And as members of our families, it's not even really as much of a tough choice now, but the practices that we've seen work for human beings, I think need to be, or we would benefit from learning some of the things that we use for people in contracts with pets, and the insurance industry might be a great next target for some.
Well, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I just actually posted, there was a conference, a vet innovative conference, where they had a number of the insurance providers discussing the different kinds of insurance for your pet. And I said, great. And let's include vet billing, which creates a payment system outside the vet sphere, because no vet wants to implement or work a payment session. They want to be paid and let somebody else do it. And also there's a savings account for pets that you sort of like a Christmas club. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'm always commenting on these kind of things, because it really is important to be able to facilitate the payment for the care of pets in this very expensive world of veterinary medicine.
Great. I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to pivot to a bit of a different question. And Jess Ken asked if you had any experience with individuals bringing an emotional support animal to mediation, and do you think that should be encouraged, or what are your thoughts about the use and involvement of animal support in the context of a mediation process?
So as Maria said at the beginning, or you said at the beginning, that, my animals might be making noises. A few of them were growling at each other during the talk. And I always said, shh, I don't know if you caught that. But I always check with everyone. I want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with the emotional support animal, as well as the person who needs the emotional support animal feels comfortable not bringing it if other people don't want it there. Mediation is based on agreements, right? We agree. So I know that in my mediations, when I lived in Westchester County, and before we all went virtual, I think I started Zoom in 2010 or 11, because most of my clients were all over the country who were having contract issues with breeders. So I had to do Zoom. It was sink or swim. But when I had mediations in my office, most of the time I had a dog there, and my dogs are very well trained. So you should never allow a dog to come who isn't well trained. You have to ask those questions, and you really want to make sure that it is there as a silent. It's sort of like the courthouse dogs. If anyone has experienced courthouse dogs, they are trained to be silent comfort for the person. So my dogs would lay on somebody's feet or would allow somebody to pet them, but they wouldn't be climbing all over them. You don't want that distraction. If someone needs an emotional support animal, of course, service animals are always welcome because that is part of the ADA. But emotional support animals, I think I would always welcome them if they were welcomed by everyone who was participating in the mediation. Somebody might be afraid, somebody might be allergic. We have to be aware of that.
That's great. Do you have resources like clauses that people can pop into mediation agreements or anything like that?
I do. I'll have to go get them. I didn't even think of bringing those. Sorry, Nikki. I can get those to you
No.
probably by next week, and you can share them with the group. I didn't even think of that. So, of course, because I always am having people ask me for these things. I'm happy to share.
No, and that's one of the the purposes of these meetings is hopefully that will have legs, centipede legs moving forward, and we will post the resources with the recording so that people who are curious can have access to as much of the real live view as possible post meeting and really bring these things on forward. If there's anybody that wants to raise their hand live, please do not be shy. I guess there's a bunch of kind of war stories that came through.
Oh, I'd love to read those. I hope I can save the chat. I'd love to read it afterwards. I don't know how to do that.
In the comments, a couple of them were animals behaving badly. There was a story about two dogs who were digging on federal land in a park. I wonder if you could talk about maybe any interactions of do you do with kind of pet and criminal allegations at all, or any sort of out there experiences that you've had that might be interesting?
Well, the Animal Law Committee of the New York State Bar Association has done extensive work with how to enforce warrants without shooting dogs. So is the ABA. That's always a case where don't presume the dog is vicious. Make sure that you make a plan. If you know that the people have dogs in the building where you're going to raid for drugs or guns or whatever, make sure you make a plan for the pets, because sometimes those pets aren't necessarily dangerous, or they can be rehabilitated. So I often think that having somebody there who can set up a better plan for the pets instead of shoot first, ask questions later is really important. As far as digging on different plants, I mean, here in North Carolina and in New York, there are rules and regulations on Jones Beach, here on Atlantic Beach, where dogs need to be leashed, and you really need to do that. And if you want to have a conversation, or if you get a ticket, having the conversation, possibly having mediation, reaching out to learn more, being curious is always a better resolution than just paying the fine and cursing at the police officer, because you need to learn the parameters of what your pet can and cannot do on public property. I know my friend, it's Wagtown, USA, and she is creating a template for making dog parks safer. I applaud her, because I don't know how they're going to do that, especially now with the canine respiratory illness that's going around. It is something that you have to be very aware of. But there is an etiquette to being in a dog park, and people need to be aware of that. And I think a mediator facilitating that conversation with the town administration where the dog park is, and the people using the dog park, would be phenomenal. And I know that that's what Beth Chisholm's doing. She's taking the time to creating those talking points, to creating the responses that are less adversarial and defensive, and more curious and encouraging. So in that sense, I think we need, as mediators, to try to create that venue. It doesn't have to be a conflict. It can actually be a mediator helping people who are trying to have a conversation about pets, to have that conversation in a way that holds a safe space. Like I said, I went to the shelter. They never thought to have a mediator come in and help them have a conversation, but it helped them then build a form, a structure by which they would be respectful in talking to each other going forward and actively listening.
Well, thank you. And in answering that question, you actually answered somebody else's question about a resource to find the people who are doing work on the dog park etiquette. So I posted the Wagtown link in the chat, and we'll reproduce these chats. I wanted to just, it's 10 o'clock. I wanted to give you an official thank you, and just say how wonderful it's been to have you and to hear the amazing tales of your
No pun intended.
no pun intended.
TAILS, right? Exactly.
Of your pet mediation. Maria, do you want to say a last word before we switch off the recording and transition to our I don't know, Deborah, if you have a few minutes to stay for informal chat, but
I do. If anyone wants to stay, I have about 10 minutes. I have a call coming in at 10:15, 10:20. So yeah.
All right.
I just want to echo Nikki's gratitude to you for such a wonderful presentation. And as you can see in the chat, you're getting all kinds of accolades. So thank you so much, Deborah, for taking the time to be with us. We are going to switch off the recording and we'll be on for about 10 minutes till about 10:10 for anyone who wants to hang around for some informal chat.
So Lavani asked about best interest, and I think that absolutely best interest is what the standard is now in New York and in several of the other states. I don't know that judges know the best interest of the pet like they don't know the best interest of the child, and I say that with all love and affection and respect. So I think that's why I always feel mediation. And if a judge could pawn it off on a mediator, I think that's his best punt early. I mean, that's my feeling, because that way he can really find out what the best interest of the pet is if they sit the people down, just to answer Lavenia's question as it went by.
Thank you. And we actually had a judge in the audience who mentioned that they were not familiar with with disputes involving pets. And so hopefully this was a really great learning experience. And to answer another question, we will be including the PowerPoint with all of the case citations so that anybody who wants to read up and dig more into the details of those will have access. So now I'm going to turn off the recording and thank everybody, and anybody who wants to hang around for 5 minutes can.
Thank you, everyone, especially you and Maria. Nikki, thank you so much. It's been fun.
Thank you.